The story you're about to see is true. The events have been recreated because through the passage of time, this has become one of the forgotten stories of sports. It was the early days of hockey, a sport born in Canada, but virtually unknown in America. In the 1920s, baseball and boxing reigned supreme. But Lester Patrick, a former star player turned trailblazing coach, was determined to change that.
Somebody you would listen to and you would do what the man said.
In 1928, Patrick and his upstart New York Rangers were looking for the franchise's first ever Stanley Cup title. But their hopes were crushed when the goaltender suffered a devastating injury, taking any chance of victory with him. With no one left to tend the Rangers' goal, Patrick was forced to improvise, suit up, and take to the ice himself.
It was the most bizarre episode in the history of hockey.
But Patrick was ancient by hockey standards. Could the aging hero somehow defend the net and inspire his team to victory? Next on Amazing Sports Stories, the true story of Lester Patrick, the old man in the net. During the mid-1920s in New York City, sports fans were enamored with newly opened Yankee Stadium and its most famous Bronx bomber, Babe Ruth. In Manhattan, meanwhile, boxing was the main draw at Madison Square Garden.
Boxing was huge then. It was before Joe Louis, but it was Dempsey's day and Tunney's day. Boxing was the engine that drove the Garden.
But in 1925, a new professional sport was introduced to Madison Square Garden: hockey. The obscure game, however, had its difficulties catching on in the big city.
There was hockey in New York going back to before World War I, but it was still foreign. It was a Canadian sport, and the Americans weren't quite sure how to handle it. So it took a while for it to be fully accepted by the media and by the fans.
Recognizing the need to sell the game to savvy New Yorkers, the Rangers hired a coach and general manager with strong name recognition.
1926-27, the Rangers began to build a team. So they brought in Lester Patrick, who was the most famous hockey name of the time. From a media standpoint, it made the Rangers real. It got a lot of press coverage. I think it put their stamp on the map.
After all, Patrick was one of the game's great retired stars. His innovative style as a defenseman helped his Montreal Wanderers win 2 Stanley Cups near the turn of the century.
He's been rated by some as one of the top 10 defensemen of all time, and that's a pretty good achievement for someone that played a 20-game schedule back in the early 1900s, but he scored a lot of goals and points.
Drawing upon his playing career, Patrick's desire in his early 40s was to become a player's coach.
They tried to instill a lot of confidence in players.
Go faster. There you go. Nice.
He tried not to do X's and O's and blackboard stuff. He wanted them to have uncomplicated minds and just be creative.
He's quick.
Yeah, he moved, huh?
Yeah, he's quick.
The players on the team, Bun Cook, Bill Cook, Ching Johnson, Frank Boucher, Taffy Abel, and a goalie named Lawrence Chabot. All these guys looked upon Lester as
Keep it smooth, long strides.
a soldier would look at a 5-star general.
Nice.
But he wasn't just a general who would lead his troop. He was a professor who could teach these guys the nuances of hockey because he knew every damn thing there was to know about the game.
His mastery was so complete that he and his brother Frank became innovators, proposing a multitude of changes to the game that revolutionized the sport.
They developed all kinds of things that are taken for granted, like numbers on the back of jerseys.
They picked it up from horse racing.
Hockey's first farm system, I don't think there's anything more important than that.
They helped develop the refrigeration system that is so necessary to have games indoor.
He and Frank wrote hockey's first rule book.
They felt that the game should be changed from a 7-man game to a 6-man game, which it is today.
They put in the blue lines.
Forward pass.
There's so many things that they put into the game that are now the fabric of the game today.
including the most important one of all was the introduction of playoffs in 1918. It took until the 1960s before football and basketball and baseball introduced playoffs. Well, hockey's been doing that since 1918.
The very playoff system that Patrick, the so-called Silver Fox, devised led the Rangers to the game's greatest stage, and in only their second season. By 1928, they were set to chase down the Stanley Cup.
They amazed the critics when they went into the Stanley Cup Finals in 1928 because it was just a rapid ascent to the top of the hockey heap.
But to win the Cup itself, the Rangers would have to take on the mighty Montreal Maroons and win. Unlike the second-year Rangers, the Maroons were a battle-hardened playoff team, having won the Stanley Cup in 1926.
You could make a lot of money betting on the Rangers because the Rangers were pretty heavy underdogs.
To defeat the Maroons, it would take a stroke of genius from the Silver Fox himself. But his path to victory would be derailed by a brutal injury, forcing Patrick to make a decision that would change the course of hockey history. Lester Patrick arrived in New York in 1926, entrusted with the task of putting the Rangers on the map. Amazingly, in only their second season, they were about to face Canadian royalty for a chance at the Stanley Cup. With his team a huge underdog, what could the Silver Fox concoct so that his fledgling Rangers would not be humiliated? In New York City in 1928, Lester Patrick was close to delivering a miracle. Not only was his team about to play in the Stanley Cup Finals, he had excited an entire city about his beloved sport.
It's long been said that Lester Patrick didn't adjust to New York, but New York adjusted to Lester Patrick. He courted the members of the press and held hockey information sessions to acquaint sports writers who were not overly familiar with hockey and certainly not overly comfortable with the game, not having played it and such. So he almost single-handedly sold the sport in New York.
Despite the strides accomplished, Patrick had his greatest sales pitch before him. Convince hockey insiders and his players that the Rangers could compete in the series with the Maroons. Unlike the second-year Rangers, the Maroons were a well-established team already with a Stanley Cup to their credit.
They were considered the power team of the National Hockey League. They were considered unbeatable. They had a lot of great players from goaltending on out. A very good defense. They had an excellent coach, Eddie Girard.
He's the guy I'm going to chance again.
A team that certainly was going to be an awesome challenge for the Rangers.
Unfortunately for the Rangers,
Let's go, guys.
it wasn't the only hurdle they would have to surmount.
Come on, get out of the zone.
The Rangers would have to play the entire series on the road in the Montreal Forum because every April, the circus came to Madison Square Garden.
The fact of the matter was, nobody did expect them to win. However, Lester Patrick was not one of the guys who expected to lose.
Pick him up. Drop back. Pick him up.
Game one was a defensive struggle,
Shoot, shoot.
with Maroons goaltender Clint Benedict besting Ranger netminder Lorne Chabot. Montreal won the first game, as expected, by a score of 2-0.
When you shut out in the opening game of the finals, it's kind of depressing. It made the second game a tremendous challenge because you lose that second game, you're really behind the eight ball, no question about it, particularly against the Maroons, who were notorious for their defense.
Game two was shaping up as another defensive battle. Chabot was desperately trying to match future Hall of Famer Clint Benedict,
Get in front of the goalie.
who had now gone 4 periods without allowing a Ranger goal. A second period shot by Maroon star center Nell Stewart, however, would change everything.
Their goalie gets hit by a shot right in the eye. At first, they didn't think it was that serious, but then they realized that he could possibly lose his vision.
Generally, the guy would come back and play, but this guy was so seriously hurt. He had to go to Royal Victoria Hospital.
Yeah, let's get him off, guys. Let's get him off.
And it was obvious that he wasn't coming back.
It had to be a tremendously damaging blow for a goalie not to return to the ice, because nobody was more courageous than National Hockey League goalies. But this was devastating injury, and of course devastating to the Rangers.
This was not just a setback for the Rangers, it was a catastrophe. For teams of the era carried no backup goaltenders. But it was an unspoken rule that if a team suffered an injury and needed to borrow a player, the opposing team would show its sportsmanship by accommodating that request.
The home team usually had a spare goalie in the stands in case something happened, which they did. But Eddie Girard wouldn't let the Rangers use their backup goalie. So they had to get a goaltender, and they had 10 minutes to do so.
A second attempt was made by Patrick to search the crowd for a suitable backup. Another unspoken rule.
There was more than one goalie in the crowd because this was the Stanley Cup Finals in Montreal, and this is where everybody congregated.
Coach, I'll play for you. Really, I'll play for you. Ref.
And Lester asked for this goalie, Alex Connell, who played for Ottawa, who had a great year that year, was in the stands also.
I'm going to sub him out for my goalie.
Let's talk to Eddie.
All right.
Patrick was hopeful Coach Girard would okay this substitution. After all, Patrick once allowed Girard, in his days as a player, to fill in against Patrick's team.
6 years earlier, when Lester was coaching the Victoria Cougars in the Stanley Cup playoffs, Ottawa was short players and they needed a skater. So they asked Lester if they could get a skater, and he said sure. So they went and got Eddie Girard, and he ended up being the star of the series. Ottawa won the Stanley Cup that year because of Eddie Girard.
Coach has a substitute that's a fan.
Absolutely not. No way. Come on. We've been here before. It's the playoffs.
Unfortunately for Patrick, Girard had a short memory and an unsportsmanlike attitude.
Absolutely not. No way.
Patrick was steamed that Girard wouldn't extend him the same courtesy he'd given Girard 6 years earlier. A courtesy that actually cost Patrick a Stanley Cup.
This was war. It's either kill or be killed. So there was not the sentiment to do a big favor for Lester Patrick.
No way. I'm not forfeiting the game. Absolutely not.
Frank Calder was the president of the league at the time, and he backed up Eddie Girard.
No way.
So Lester's in there with pretty much his hands tied.
It was tough Kazabis, Lester. Do what you gotta do, but we're not gonna help you, period.
But Lester Patrick would not back down from a fight. The Silver Fox was left with just one option.
You know what? I'm still part of this team. I'm getting dressed.
It's your funeral, Lester. It's your funeral. Have it your way.
He decided that he wanted to do it. It was the most bizarre episode in the history of hockey.
The Rangers were on the brink of disaster. Down one game and down their only goaltender, 44-year-old coach turned netminder Lester Patrick decided to don the pads. But could the old man turn back the clock and challenge hockey's greatest team? Backed into a corner by the opposing coach, 44-year-old Lester Patrick was going to play goaltender versus the most dominant team in hockey. Fear surrounded the situation. Would he get hurt? Would his team be humiliated? And for Lester himself, what consequences would this shocking decision have on his career? With no choice left, and with his Irish ire aroused, Patrick prepared to don a uniform once again.
They had to take the equipment off of their goalie for my grandfather to put it on. He said, just give me a fresh pair of underwear, I'll put that stuff on and go out and play.
It was somewhat surreal, and people said in the back of their minds, I can't believe this is happening. But indeed it was.
I donned Mr. Chabot's uniform. Everything fit me like a glove. except the skates and shoes, which were a size or so too large. But I managed to overcome that handicap by putting on extra socks.
Patrick never wanted to take the net. He'd never played the position before. But Gerard's unsportsmanlike behavior
Absolutely not.
made Patrick see red.
And knowing Patrick says I know them, I'm sure he was pretty perturbed at Eddie Gerard and Frank Calder, so that probably inspired him a little bit more. They don't like to be pushed against the wall.
But at 44 years old, twice the age of most of the other players, could adrenaline alone carry Patrick through?
It's a very difficult position to play, especially if you don't practice it. And to be 44 years old in 99 days with no practice, that's pretty amazing.
That was considered ancient in those days. Some people thought it was ludicrous, that it was burlesquing hockey for this guy to go in.
The Rangers would circle the wagons in order to support their coach-turned-goaltender.
The Rangers had to be motivated to protect Lester and to avenge the bad guys from the Maroons.
The Maroons were a little bit cocky at that point, and when the goalie Lorne Chabot went down with the eye injury, that made them even cockier.
Play resumed with Patrick in goal. Montreal soon discovered that the old man wouldn't be the pushover they expected.
It was like the unfolding of a great hockey melodrama. Lester was doing very well. The important thing was that he kept the Rangers in the game.
He did stop 18 shots.
He used his guile and his knowledge of the game.
He would yell at the players, let them shoot, let them shoot. And all the players are going, no, we can't do that, we can't do that.
The Rangers' strategy was obvious. Press the action into the Montreal zone. And for a while, they succeeded. The Rangers broke a scoreless tie in the third period on a Bill Cook goal. And then braced for the Maroons' offensive onslaught. Patrick, unbelievably, held Montreal scoreless until the 14-minute mark of the third period. Drained, the Silver Fox allowed a goal by Maroon star Nell Stewart.
Lester was beaten once, so it wasn't like he was Mr. Zero, but he got him into the overtime, and when it comes to overtime, all you need is one goal, and you win the hockey game.
Patrick was miraculous in getting his team into overtime, and 7 minutes into the extra period, Rangers star Frank Boucher swept in on the Maroons' net. While the Rangers' 3-2 win was huge, it was dwarfed by Lester Patrick's heroic efforts.
Lester putting on the pads is certainly the epitome of all the legendary hockey stories.
It's kind of a fairy tale ending.
Something that a Hollywood scriptwriter would probably be thrown out of the producer's office, having the Rangers win the game that way.
Inspired by their coach's selflessness, the Rangers accomplished one of hockey's greatest wins ever.
It had to be the turning point in the series. Just to win a game in the Montreal Forum against one of the premier teams in the league in that fashion had to give them a boost, which would carry over for a couple of days, and sure enough, that's what happened.
That Game 2 victory was Lester Patrick's only game in goal, but it was enough to propel the Rangers behind a replacement goalie to win the next 2 out of 3 games. And in doing so, the franchise won its first ever Stanley Cup.
To this day, which is amazing 80 years later, Lester Patrick is the oldest player to have his name engraved in the Stanley Cup. He was 44 years of age when he played goal, no less.
The miraculous championship thrilled New Yorkers, who began to embrace the Rangers, led by the heroic Lester Patrick, as their very own.
It was the golden age of sports. Red Grange, Earl Sandy the jockey, Dempsey, of course, was at the top of the list, and this particular victory and the way it happened gave Lester entree to that group.
The revered coach and his young champions were honored by New York City's mayor, Jimmy Walker, at City Hall. And for Lester Patrick, the honors and awards kept coming in droves, celebrating his half-century of hockey greatness. He was a Hall of Fame player, multiple Stanley Cup champion, innovator, trailblazer, and coach. And of course, his family. Patrick is also known as the patriarch of hockey's royal family.
The family goes back to the beginnings of hockey. Lester Patrick, his brother Frank, they were the core of the royal family of hockey. And then Lester's kids made a big name. Murray and Lynn playing for the Rangers when they won the Cup in 1940. And then you had Craig Patrick, GM of note, both in New York and in Pittsburgh. Dick Patrick, who has been at the helm of the Washington Capitals. Patrick's all over the place, so the Patrick name is hockey.
So much so that the sport now recognizes outstanding contributions to the game in the United States with a trophy bearing his name, the Lester Patrick Award.
I just can't emphasize how proud I am to have gotten it, because there's not a higher honor for a non-player in hockey than the Lester Patrick Award.
Winning the Lester Patrick Trophy was the high point in my life because he got me interested in the game.
Lester Patrick's grandson Craig won the award as well, primarily for his contributions as Herb Brooks' assistant coach on the 1980 gold medal-winning Olympic team.
People that have done some great things in hockey in the U.S., that's the award that's given to them.
Lester's timeless contributions to the sport have made him a legend, but one feat among the many stands alone.
As phenomenal and arresting as the moment was when he went into the Ranger nets, Lester did so much for the game that you cannot simply say, well, that's what Lester Patrick was all about. But in terms of one particular event, the diamond in the necklace was that game in Montreal when Lester put on the pads.